In this lesson, we'll add an additional layer of longer fuzz to our fox model. Let's begin. While the short fuzz that we added to our fox's head looks great so far, we can improve the look by adding a thin layer of longer fuzz on top of the short fuzz. This longer fuzz will add small wispy hairs that extend past the edge of the model, giving the head an overall softer appearance. We'll also be using a new tool to comb these longer hairs so that they follow the curves of the head and add even more detail. The process for adding this longer fuzz will be largely identical to the short fuzz, so we're going to be going through this process a lot quicker than the short fuzz that we added first. I won't be stopping to explain each parameter as we've already done that in the previous lesson. After the long fuzz is added though, we will slow down again and learn how to comb and style it. Okay, let's get everything set up and ready to add the fuzz. First, make sure that you're set to the layout workspace found up here at the top left, if you're not there already. Next, we're going to switch this left viewport to the rendered mode by clicking this button here on the far right. Now we're going to go over here to this list on the right side. We're going to scroll down this list until you see Fox Head inside the Fox collection. And we're going to twirl this open so that we can see the short fuzz object. We're going to hide this for now just by clicking this little eyeball icon here. This will hide it in the viewport, but it won't hide it in the render. We'll turn the short fuzz back on later, but for now, while we're working on the longer fuzz, it's going to be easier if we have the short fuzz hidden. Next, we're going to select the fox head from the list here, or just inside the viewport, whichever you prefer. And then while hovering our mouse over here in the right viewport, we'll hit Shift and A, go to Curve, and then choose Fur from the bottom of this list. Before we make any changes, we will rename this. So we're going to double click on this word curves, and we'll call this long fuzz, and then hit enter. We won't be adjusting the material for this long fuzz until we're done combing it, as the white material actually makes it a lot easier to see in the viewport for now. Now that we have this long fuzz added, let's go through some of the modifiers. So now we can go down here and switch to the Modifiers tab so we can see the modifiers applied. Just like last time, we're going to start by collapsing all of these modifiers by clicking these tiny arrows to the left of them, and then we'll be adding one more modifier by going to Add Modifier, choosing Search, and then typing in Trim, T-R-I-M, and choosing Trim Hair Curves. Again, we'll collapse this so it's easier to see, and we're going to drag on these little dots here and move it to the third spot in the list from the top. So just below Interpolate and above Hair Curves. Okay, so let's quickly go through each of these modifiers and make any adjustments that we need to. Again, I won't be explaining each of these settings as we've already discussed them in the short fuzz lesson. Feel free to reference that lesson again if you're confused about what any of these settings do. So we'll start from the top of the list and then work our way down. So at the very top here, we're going to go to Set Hair Curves Profile, and we're going to change the radius to 0.00005. So 3 zeros after the decimal point, and then hit enter. Now we can move to our next modifier, so the second in the list. I'll scroll down a bit so we can see it. And again, we do need to change these in a specific order, just like last time. That way we don't overload Blender with too many hairs all at one time. So we're going to start by changing this viewport amount first. So we'll set this to 0.1 and then hit enter. Now we can go to our density. And we'll change that to 6000, 6000. And then last, we're going to add the density mask that we had before to prevent it from attaching to the nose or the eyes. So we'll click this symbol here on the right, then click the dark gray box to the left and choose Remove Fur. Now we can collapse this and move on to the Trim Hair Curves modifier. And we're going to change the length to 0.165 and then hit enter. Okay, so we have two more modifiers to adjust. We'll go down here to Hair Curves Noise. And the only thing we'll adjust here is just the scale. We're going to set this to 0.5 and then hit enter. And then one last modifier, we'll collapse this, twirl open Frizz, and then we can uncheck Cumulative Offset. We're going to switch the distance to 0.03, and then we can check on Preserve Length. And that's it for our modifier adjustments. So you can either twirl all these open if you'd like, or in my case, I'm just going to leave them all twirled closed, and then I can open them up later if I needed to. We've got all the settings for the fur dialed in, so now we're ready to begin combing the hair into place. The point of combing the hair is to make it follow the curves of the head and not just stick straight out of the surface as it is now. This will be a bit of a manual process, and everyone's hair will look a little bit different, which I think is pretty cool. I'll show you how to use the comb and the basic method for combing the hair, but this will be a lot more of a free-form process than adding the hair to the head. I'll more or less just be providing you guidance on how to do this, but it's ultimately up to you to comb the hair into place. So our first step is going to be switching into the sculpt mode, which you can find over here in the right viewport. You want to make sure that you can see this drop down list on here on the left side. If you can't see this drop down list here with where it says object mode currently, you need to click in your middle mouse button and pan this to the side so you can see all the way over here on the far left, and then we're going to switch to sculpt mode. Sculpt mode will give us access to a bunch of different tools that affect the hair in different ways. There are quite a bit of tools, so we won't be going through all of them, but we will be using the comb tool. This comb tool does exactly what it sounds like. It allows us to comb the direction of the hair. We can find the comb tool down here, and it's this symbol here where it has the hair growing up and then being pulled to the right. Your file likely already has this tool selected by default, but if not, you can just simply select it here from the list. All of these tools, including the comb tool that we just switched to, affect the little white guides on the surface of the head. They're a little bit difficult to see, but if you spin your view to the side and then zoom in, we can see here that we have these gray hairs that have that kind of frizzy effect, but then there's these straight white thin lines that poke out of the head as well. These are called guides. When using these tools, such as the comb tool, you're not technically moving the hairs. You're instead moving these little white guides that we see here, and then the guides tell the hairs nearby how to react. If you notice when you're using your comb tool that the hair sometimes doesn't react, it's likely because you've missed one of these guides when combing. So if you comb between these white guides, you might notice that the hair really doesn't do anything, and that's because you're not hitting one of these with the tool. With that brief explanation out of the way, let's start adjusting the hair. Our first step is adjusting the size of the brush. We can do that up here where it says radius. We're going to type in 40 for the radius, so it makes the brush a little bit smaller. This brush size should allow us to be pretty detailed with our combing without needing to be really specific about where the guides are. You'll also notice that as you zoom in and out on this viewport here, that the size of the brush remains consistent. So if you're zoomed out further, the brush is going to be functionally larger on this, so it's going to cover more of the model. And the more you zoom in, the less of the model it covers. So that's important to take into account as well. If you'd like to work on your model a bit closer like this, you might want to set your brush to a larger size, such as 80 maybe, and that will allow you to cover a similar amount of area even though you're zoomed in further. As an additional tip, if you'd like to change your brush a little bit more on the fly, you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard on the far right side near roughly where the enter key is. So the left bracket will make it smaller and the right bracket will make it larger. So if you'd like to move around your model and zoom in and out and then just adjust your brush size on the fly, you can do that as well. I'm going to set mine back down to roughly 40 and I might change it later. Now all we need to do to begin combing this hair is to simply click and drag on the model. So I'm going to start by zooming out a little bit, rotating my view, and my first goal here is to comb these hairs in the middle, up and back, and then the hairs here on either side of the eyebrow to the left or to the right so that they follow the shape of the head. So I'm going to start by just clicking and dragging right here in the center of the eyes and just start pulling this hair back. And we can see as I'm clicking and dragging, the hair is moving along with the direction of the brush. Once I have the hair in the middle going back, then I can start combing it off to the side around the eyes. So maybe I'll comb these to the left and then start combing these to the right. And our goal here is to just recognize the flow of the model underneath and then make these hairs here follow a somewhat similar direction. So in real life, this is likely how this hair would flow, so we want the hair on our model to do the same. You can also see how every one of these clicks isn't really moving the hair a whole lot, so sometimes you need to go over an area multiple times and to make sure that you're actually hitting the guides nearby. And unfortunately, due to these hairs being controlled by these white guides, you might find it difficult to comb some of these hairs into place. If this happens, I recommend you just take a moment to look around the area that you want to comb and try to find the closest guide. So in this case, if I wanted to comb this area specifically, I can see here that there's a guide there. So I want to click on this guide to have the best effect on the hair nearby. If I click somewhere where there isn't a guide at all, it's unlikely that it'll make much change at all. You can see here I'm clicking and dragging, it's not really doing anything. So I recommend when possible, if you're having an issue, try finding the guide near where you want to adjust the hair and then click directly on top of that guide and see what it does to the hair nearby. Also, as a general rule, these guides are a lot easier to affect if you look at them from the side like this. So rather than looking on them straight on like this, you might have better success rotating your view so you're seeing a profile view of these and then just combing along the surface here and seeing how it affects the hairs. It also gives you a better idea of how much this hair is actually puffing out from the surface. You don't want your hair going into the model too much. So as an example, if I was combing this hair and I noticed that I moved it too far into the model, you might start noticing that there's kind of a bald spot here. That's something we want to avoid because that's saying that all of these hairs aren't actually poking out from the surface. They're actually growing into the model, which means we won't really see them at all. These areas won't technically be bald because there is going to be a layer of short fuzz here, but we are losing the effect of this longer fuzz that we just added. So we want to avoid areas like this. If this happens, try to find the bald spot on the model and then rotate your view to an angle that's kind of like a profile view here. So I know that this guide is somewhere around here. I'm just going to click on this area and start dragging across it and pulling on it. You might be hard to find it sometimes because the guide is also hidden. That's why this area is bald. If you're having trouble seeing this guide, you can hit Alt and Z on your keyboard to put your model into X-ray mode. So now this is allowing me to see through this model slightly, and I can see here this is the guide that I need to affect because it's right in the middle of this bald spot. Now I can rotate my view to a spot where I can actually see the guide pretty well, and then start clicking and dragging on it. If you're having difficulty moving this guide too much, you might need to have a bigger brush. So we can make our brush a bit bigger here and maybe adjust your angle. Eventually you're going to find an angle here that actually affects this hair. If you have a particularly stubborn guide like this one seems to be, you might need to actually rotate your view slightly inside the model so that you're on this side of the model before you start adjusting it. So now we're actually inside this head, and it should allow us, how we can see here, to push this guide outside of it. Don't really worry about what it looks like when you're pushing it out. You just need to get it outside the head. And then once you have it outside the head again, we can rotate around and then fix this problem area. At this point, you might want to turn off the X-ray mode. So hit Alt and Z again at the same time. And now we can fix this area here and just be careful not to push it back inside the head again. Now that I've given you some tips on how to affect these hairs, let's quickly go through some of these areas at a slightly slower pace. Then I'll finish combing the entire head during a time lapse. I won't be talking during this portion, but you will get to watch what I'm doing in a slightly sped up version of the video. During this time lapse, however, I will include a graphic along the side of the screen showing arrows drawn on the head, which give you the direction that all these hairs should ideally be combed. You can use this as a guide of your own, or you can follow your own styling if you'd like. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a free-form process and everybody's head's going to look a little bit different. So don't stress out too much about the details, but if you'd like a little bit more of a guiding hand, you can use my images with the arrows drawn on them as a guide. So once you're happy here with the forehead and you have everything combed upward in the middle and then to the sides above each of the eyebrows, we can then move over here to the ears instead. The ears can be somewhat difficult due to their shape. The goal with the ears is to comb the hair upward toward the tip of the ear at the top. The hairs around the tip of the ear are going to be acting a little bit odd though, due to the shape of the point that they're attached to. So we'll need to take some special care up there. But for now, I'm just going to focus here on this left ear, and we're going to start combing all the hair on this ear upward towards this point. So you'll find again, it's a little bit easier to move these hairs when you're looking down the side of them. So I'm just going to start by pulling these hairs upward. And again, just rotate around this view. You'll get a better comb if you can look around the entire ear while you're doing it, not just focusing on one specific spot the entire time. So just kind of move around and move hairs little by little towards the tip of the ear. And all these hairs along the backside should also be moving up. And then don't forget the center of the ear here. We're also going to pull these upward. And do be careful of those bald spots here in the middle of the ear. This center of the ear and the back of the ear here tend to get bald spots pretty easily. So just move the hair little by little, and not moving it too fast will help you avoid that. And then once you're happy with the hair all pointing upward on the ear, we can move on to the tip. I think this is pretty good for this demonstration. So now we can move up here to the tip of the ear. So when we reach the tip of this ear, we'll notice the hairs kind of go a little wild. They all kind of just go different directions. That's because of this surface. The surface points many different directions, so the hair is going to reflect that. There's going to be a bit of trial and error here as we comb the tips. So I would just move slow as you move through this and not move anything too much in one direction. But my advice here for the tips of the ears is to avoid having the hair stick too far out past the tip. In general, we're going to have this hair kind of wrap around this direction from the front, and then have the hair on the back side wrap around to the front side. So we're kind of curling it around the tip here, rather than having it just poke straight out into the air, because then you get a lot of these really wispy little hairs here, which depending on the animal might be more accurate. If you're maybe turning this into a lynx or something like that, it might look pretty good to have a couple wispy hairs poking out here. But for our fox and the look that we're after here, we don't want to have too many tufts of little hair pointing out here. So we're going to kind of wrap these around the tip. And to do this, again, you're just going to have to go kind of slow. And you can see as you move just this one guide here, all these hairs around the tip all start curling around the back. That's kind of what we want, but you can see it moves it really quickly as you're going. So you have to be kind of careful here. And then again, the same thing in the back. We want to kind of move this up and have them kind of curl around the tip of the ear here. And then just keep pushing them around. You don't want the hair to disappear entirely on the tip. You don't want to have a bald spot there, but you don't want it sticking out too far, or else it looks a little wild there. And this is a good time to just kind of move around the ear and just make sure all these hairs that you're combing are all moving in the same direction. So I think for now that looks pretty good for this ear. And then the process for this other ear would be identical. I won't be going through that now as it's basically just the same thing. Comb all this stuff upward along the front and the back. And then at the tip, again, we'll just have to move it so that they kind of curl around the tip of the ear to avoid it poking out too far. Okay, with the ear done, let's cover one last tricky area. And that's here right along the front of the face, around the nose and the mouth. The tip of the nose and the front of the mouth have limited guides in this area. So we don't have a whole lot of control over this area, unfortunately. This doesn't mean that we can't comb this hair though. The goal with all this hair around the nose is to comb it all in a direction away from it. So we want all the hairs above it to move away from it and up, the hairs below it to move down, and then the hairs along the side to go along the side of the face, going back this direction. As I mentioned before, the lack of guides in some of these areas will make this a little bit more challenging, but we can still comb it pretty well. So let's start here in the middle, and we're going to comb this guide here right below the nose straight down. So we're just going to grab this and then move it downward. Now above the nose, we can start combing these guides upward. In this case, this guide here is all the way up here between the eyes. That's generally what controls these hairs this far down. So we can start moving that. And then along the side here, we're going to have to find the guide. In this case, it's right here to the left. Start combing these back in space to the left. And this area here is going to be relatively difficult to avoid some bald spots here, especially around the nose. Luckily, that kind of works to our favor here because on a real animal, the hair around the nose and the face and the mouth would be shorter than the hair around the rest of the head. So I wouldn't worry too much if you can't get rid of some of these bald spots that appear. Try to avoid them if you can, but don't agonize over getting rid of them because you do have somewhat limited control in this area to begin with. Now we can just rotate around to this side. And again, just keep pulling these to the side, pulling them away from the nose, but still making sure that they follow this curvature of the face. So this face here should be moving this way. We can also start pulling some of these guides here below the eye. And our goal here is to just pull all these hairs along the face away from the nose. Everything is moving backwards in space. Once you have a lot of the side stuff done, you can spin around to the bottom and start moving these guides down. Start pulling these back towards the chin. All these guides here can start flowing back basically directly towards the bow tie. And we can see here now all these hairs are starting to flow away from the nose in the center. If you can find the guides here along the side, you might be able to start splitting them so that they follow left and right underneath. But if you can't find the guide for that, or if the one just doesn't exist, I would recommend just combing them down and back. So basically down and underneath the chin like this. And then along the sides here is where you can actually make it follow the left or the right side of the face. So at this point, you should have all your hairs now kind of pointing away from the nose and then following basically the shape of this smile. And as I mentioned before, don't worry too much about these bald spots you're seeing here along the sides of the nose, as these are really difficult to avoid, and ultimately they do kind of work with the overall fur of this creature anyway, so I really wouldn't worry too much about these. It's important to remember that these longer hairs that we're adding are only there to add further detail to an already dense layer of fuzz below. If there are a few hairs out of place, it really only adds to the cozy, handmade feeling of this fox. Okay, so the time has come to speed up a bit and finish combing the rest of the hair. I won't be talking during this part, so feel free to pause the video and catch up whenever you need to. I'll also place some visual guides on the screen to show the direction that I'm combing these hairs. That way you can use those as a guide for your own combing. Simply follow the direction that the arrows are moving on the face and comb your hair in that same direction. One last word of advice. I'd avoid combing the hairs too close to the surface, as you want to make sure that they sit on top of the short fuzz. When in doubt, let the fuzz be a little bit puffier and longer than you think it needs to be, and you can always go back afterwards and comb the hair down if it's too far out from the model. So if you start combing this hair and it's really tight along the surface, you might want to pull the guide out a little bit so that it puffs off the surface a bit more than you think it needs to. As I mentioned, you can always go back afterwards when you turn the short fuzz back on, and then start combing this longer fuzz down a little bit so it's just above the short fuzz length if you want. If you'd really like to, you could also just turn on the short fuzz visibility so you can see how long this hair is roughly. It's not an exact guide of how long it is, but it does help. It will, however, make this view a lot more cluttered and harder to read. So in my case, I'm going to be leaving this off and then just adjusting it afterwards if I need to. Alright, I'll see you in a little bit when my fox is fully combed. Don't forget to use the guides along the side of the screen for your own fox. Okay, I have my fox fully combed and I think he's looking pretty great. We can see here as I spin around that I mostly just combed everything upward towards the points, especially along the sides of the face. So the face here was combed to these points on the cheek, back to the left, and then back to the right. Anything underneath was combed downward. And then the back of the head here gets a little bit tricky because generally you want these hairs between the ears to flow up over the top of the head and then backwards this direction through the ears. But then the hair at the bottom here you kind of want to be combed down and up at the same time. So luckily it's the back of the head. We're not really going to see this here in this render, so I wouldn't worry too much about this area, but it can be a little bit chaotic in this area as you want to start combing it downward this direction, upward this direction, and then backwards this direction. So you can see here all the hair on the back of my head kind of goes in a little bit of a different direction, but that's kind of a natural sort of chaotic fuzzy fiber look back there anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. And then again, the back here, these ears just kind of all go upwards towards the tip, and then paying special attention to make sure that the tip of the ears don't go a little too far out from the tips of the ears here. The fuzz stays pretty close to the edges. When you're satisfied with the combing of your hair, you can go up here to where it says Sculpt mode and then switch it back to Object mode instead. And we have two last changes to make before we're done with this lesson. Before we make any adjustments though, let's render the image with just the long fuzz applied so we can see what it looks like overall. So I'm going to go over here and make sure the short fuzz is turned off with both the eyeball, and I'm going to click on this little rendered icon here, so the little camera, to make sure it's hidden in both views. Now I can go to rendering, and then it doesn't really matter which slot you're on, but I'll switch it back to slot 1, and then I'll go to render image. Okay, so with our render done, we can now see how much realism this longer fuzz adds to the fox. By combing this fuzz to match the curvature of the head, we've accentuated the underlying model while also giving the overall look of the fuzz some directionality, so it's not just random curls. We can see that especially here in areas like the ears, where this hair clearly follows the shape of the ear and it's not just random curls everywhere. Also along the sides of the face and on the forehead. We can also see here this bald spot that I mentioned that is somewhat difficult to avoid. That really won't matter once we see the short fuzz in this area as well. But there's really great wispy hairs and kind of a general softer, woolier look along the edges of the model that we didn't have before. Alright, so let's make a few final changes before we end the lesson. First up, we're going to apply the correct material to the fuzz so it matches the underlying colors of the head, just like the short fuzz did. We're going to do that by going over here to shading. Then we'll switch this top viewport to the rendered mode using this far right button. We can also zoom in on this head so we can get a better look on it. And then next, make sure that you have the long fuzz still selected in this list. And over here, we're going to choose this drop down, one that has a little circle with a checker box on it. Click this drop down here, and then we'll choose fur material, the one without the 001 at the end of it, so the one just above it. And then what happened to our fox's head? I'll be completely honest, I haven't quite figured out why this happens, but it obviously has something to do with swapping the default material on this fuzz layer. Luckily, this is pretty easy to fix. So to fix this quite unsettling looking issue, we're going to go over here to the right side to the Modifiers tab. We're going to twirl open the second modifier here, the Interpolate Hair Curves. We're going to go down here where it says UV Map. We'll click on this name here, and then we're going to switch it to Surface UV Coordinate. And then we're going to go back to the top of this list again, click on where it says Surface UV Coordinate now, and we're going to switch it back to UV Map. We'll now see that the fox's head looks correct again, and the fuzz is properly colored based on the underlying texture. So the fuzz is orange where it should be, and it's white where it should be. Again, I'm not 100% certain why this fixes this issue. I suspect it's just telling Blender to reload this map, and that somehow fixes whatever happened while we switched it, but luckily it's relatively easy to fix, so I won't complain too much. Okay, so we have just a few things left to change. To make this last change, we're going to go over here to the layout workspace found here at the top. And now we want to disable the shadows on the long fuzz just like we did for the short fuzz, because it's going to have the exact same issue. This long fuzz will start casting shadows across the entire head and make the thing overall a little bit too dark and kind of crunchy looking. So we're just going to turn the shadows off entirely. So again, make sure you have the long fuzz still selected. Go down here to the object properties, scroll down this list until you start seeing visibility, and then underneath ray visibility, we're going to uncheck shadow. And then lastly, we're going to go over here to the short fuzz and then turn on both of these checkboxes here. So we'll highlight the eyeball and the little camera icon next to it. And that's it for this lesson. We'll save the final render of the fox for the next lesson, as it'll give me a chance to explain some of the compositing effects currently applied to the render, as well as one additional optional one you can use if you'd like. In the next lesson, we'll render the final image of our fox and discuss some compositing effects. I'll see you there.